we are not going to waste time. I'm going to ask the Deputy Minister, Honorable Botes, to lead us on our item of today, getting a briefing from the department. Honorable Botes.
Good morning, Slalo. I'm just trying to check, am I audible?
You are very much audible. What is audibility in Afrikaans?
There's no direct translation. It's not Ajime moet hoor.
Okay.
Hoorbaar. Chairperson Clara, it's
Yes.
Afrikaans word as hoorbaar. You know, I'm from the northwest as well.
I think you are right. Hoorbaar. Yeah, yes. I think you are right. Hoorbaar.
Yes.
Audibility. Hoorbaar. They head op die kop. Sever Afrikaans. No, just hoorbaar, meneer.
Okay. No, thank you very much, Slalo, and members of the PC. Chairperson, I think I'm privileged just to give a preface on more detail Dirko presentation as it relates to the outcomes of the Assembly of the African Union. I think I obviously just needs to make the point, Chairperson, that the African Union remains the apex in relation to a multilateral organization that seeks to correspond on our Pan-African outlook and African solidarity. And it is for that specific reason that when the Assembly convenes, it always convenes having hindsight for the AU Agenda 2063, which speaks amongst others about the Africa that we want, that should be all-inclusive, and Chairperson, that are obviously premise on inclusive prosperity, on the 7 ideal aspirations. I must indicate, Chair, that apart from the fact that there has been a number of issues that the Assembly have dealt with, I think the one political issue that I wish to obviously amplify was the posture of the AU Assembly as it relates to the question of the Israeli observer status. You can recall that the Assembly last year have canvassed an opinion where there was a resolution ultimately to establish an ad hoc committee to dispense with this matter. The ad hoc committee, Chairperson, obviously since that time, unfortunately, has not been able to convene, and as a result, the appreciation was that up until there is conclusion of the recommendations of the ad hoc committee to the Assembly, the observer status ordinarily, should not be necessarily, allowed. And that is our understanding from South Africa. Of course, the AU Commission Chairperson had a different understanding. And as a result, he obviously unilaterally invited, obviously, the Israel to assume the observer status, which he obviously have granted. As a result, the diplomatic representative of the Israeli state has then been unfortunately asked to leave the plenary session, and that has created a heightened political ferment as it relates in particular accusations about the role of South Africa and a number of other states to seek to dilute decisions of the AU Assembly and our overarching posture to diplomatically create the embarrassment for the state of Israel. So that obviously is the context of a very key and critical issue that the AU Assembly ordinarily have dealt with. And the second issue that I wanted to just amplify, Slalo, is obviously the outcomes as it relates to the peace and security architecture. I think the Assembly have obviously definitively expressed a concern about the fact that the current configuration of the UNSC firstly in a non-permanent capacity results still in the underrepresentation of Africa as a continent, because we only have 3 members there, commonly known as the A3, in a non-permanent capacity. And then obviously, Chairperson, our long-standing African common position on the Iswaleni Consensus and the Surte Declaration that speaks about, the expansion of the P5, obviously to include representation in particular from the African continent. That is a issue, obviously, that the Assembly have continued to express a view on when we speak about, peace and security architecture. And then obviously, Chairperson, the PSC, of which South Africa is a member, have reflected on a number of ongoing conflicts. It have looked at issues of the Sahel, the Great Lakes region. It have obviously looked at the ongoing challenges in the southern part of the continent. And for our purpose, obviously, very specific reference on the SAMIM mission, which is the multilateral, obviously, intervention as it relates to northern Mozambique. It have also looked at what is the effectiveness of the MONUSCO mission in the DRC, the Force Intervention Brigade, which South Africa are obviously esteemed troop contributing countries in relation to that issues. And obviously, Chairperson, the cessation of hostilities between the TPLF and obviously Ethiopia. So those are 2 of the key issues. There is a number of development issues, Chairperson, which the presentation will at a more detailed level raise opinion about in terms of food and security, the OUDA NEPAD chaired now by Egypt, and a number of concurrent issues. But I thought, for the purposes, obviously, of my intervention, those were the 2 substantive issues that I wanted to raise in relation to that issue. And at this point, Slalo, I'll, with your permission, hand over to the Acting Deputy Director General, which will, for global governance and multilateralism, which would seek to take the PC in confidence at the detail level.
Good morning, Chair. Can I take the floor? Good morning, Chair. Oh, yes, thank you. All right. Well, thank you very much to the Portfolio Committee and members of the department, senior officials. Basically, the presentation is focusing on the South Africa's participation to the AU Summit, the AU Assembly, which was recently held in Addis Ababa. We will cover the main focus areas and the outcomes for the summit, specifically 5 of them, which is focus on peace and security, which was held as a separate summit under the African Union Peace and Security Council. And then the key focus on the African Continental Free Trade area, which mainly the theme that has been agreed to, and then the activities specifically related to South Africa's chairship, the championship of COVID-19. And this year's assembly session also focused on the evaluation of Agenda 2063 in what was called the first 10-year implementation of Agenda 2063. And then we will also focus on the G20 membership proposal that was presented and the issues pertaining to the reform of the United Nations Security Council, and again the outer part heads of state and government coordination committee. I think the Deputy Minister has already covered the issue of Israel, so I will not spend time on that, and then we will conclude. Next slide, please. The 36th ordinary session of the Assembly of the African Union was held on the 18th and from the 18th and the 19th of February in Addis Ababa. It was preceded by the Executive Council, which is basically a preparatory ministerial council for ministers of foreign affairs, who essentially prepare and go through all the items, and they decide which items should go to the Assembly and which items can be left for political guidance at the level of Executive Council. And our Honorable Minister, Naledi Pandor, was the head of the delegation. The Union of Comoros was endorsed as a chair of the African Union for the year 2023 until the next summit in 2024, which was basically, and it came from the endorsement of the respective region, which is the Eastern Africa region, that they can chair the African Union for the period. The theme for the year is acceleration of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, and it was launched and endorsed by the Assembly. Subsequent to that, the summit itself was also attended by the President, who was accompanied by the ministers, Minister Pandor, Minister Pungubele, Minister Patel, Minister Pasha, and Deputy Minister Thabang Makwetla. Next slide, please. Our President, in his capacity as a chair of the Security Council, South Africa in
Anton, where are you?
I'm in a meeting here, the photo particularly out.
Oh,
Hi.
oh, okay.
Yeah.
Meeting.
Can you mute?
What meeting?
Can you mute, please?
Oh, okay.
mute,
No, it's
please?
fine. I don't know how
mute,
to see the volume of my Zoom. Okay, it's fine.
No, I'm coming now.
Interference.
Sorry, Chair, someone is on the line. Can you all just mute? The presenter is cutting out and someone is having a private conversation. If we can just see to it. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Well, during the month of February, South Africa, in the rotational system of the African Union Peace and Security Council, it was South Africa's turn to chair during the month of February, and it was a strategic intervention on the part of South Africa to chair during February, even though the disadvantage was that it then shortens our chairship because of the Assembly. However, the biggest advantage is that the attendance is at heads of state level, and therefore we were able to make a difference in that respect. The AUPSC met a day prior to the Assembly, and so these were just two separate events altogether. It met on the 17th of February and reviewed the security situation in the east of the DRC within the context of the peace and security and cooperation framework and the Great Lakes region. It looked at the issue of the deployment of the East African community troops in the east of the DRC. And again, the one issue again that was of strategic importance for South Africa was the attendance, which for me was one of the main issues. The attendance by the presidents of DRC, Angola, Rwanda, Burundi, Kenya were invited, and we also had the participation of the United Nations Secretary General, which was quite unprecedented. Under the chairship of South Africa, the conclusion and the communique.
My phone, I don't have that. It's this meeting that Mr. Ndimeni is doing. I can't hear. See, Laura's the one who's sharing the screen.
Sorry, can the person's mute there? Laura, can you mute?
Not responding.
Lubabalo, can you deal with the unmuted?
Yes, please. So the meeting was attended by heads of state, and again, heads of state from the respective countries that you mentioned, and also.
So sorry, Lubabalo. Lubabalo. I was just saying, deal with people who are not muted. Proceed, sir.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So the meeting essentially brought a very strategic issue for South Africa, which is basically the call to the respective heads of state, especially from the DRC and Rwanda, to engage in a ceasefire, operation, but yet at the same time to find peace in the east of the DRC, especially with the impending elections coming in the DRC towards the end of the year in December. The fact that both heads of state were participants in the meeting was a major scoop for South Africa, because there has been several developments that have been challenging with respect to resolving the issue in the DRC, and that was a very encouraging development. And then in the context of the Assembly, President Ramaphosa, again in our capacity as the chair of the month for February, presented a report on the activities of peace and security in the state of peace and security.
Chairperson, Honorable Faber, I lost the speaker. I don't know if anyone else also have the same problem.
In the continent, and the reports, including dependence of instability, illicit flow, part of the unconstitutional changes of government, also related to a session that was held in May in Malabo, which looked very closely at unconstitutional changes of government, and which was presented then. So that was part of the report. With respect to the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, previous slide, please. Can you just go to a previous slide, please? Slide 4. Yes. On slide 4, I just wanted to also just add another dimension here, which will probably come later, related to the whole issue of Africa's response to Peace and Security Council issues, especially the issue of the C10, which is chaired by Cameroon. The C10 is a committee of 10, and the issue of reform has become a very controversial issue, especially the reform of the United Nations Security Council. The C10 is charged with the responsibility to focus on that. Slide 5, please. Well, under the African Continental Free Trade Area, we've seen a relative increase in the ratifications for the AfCFTA, especially after there was initial reluctance around the opening up for issues of trade in this respect. Now, the ratifications as they stand now, they are up to 47, with the latest ratifications by Comoros, Mozambique, and Botswana. The one outstanding member that has still not signed the agreement is Eritrea, And there's that is the one country that has been resisting ratifying the AFCFTA. We are looking forward to having Eritrea join, and at least with the goal of achieving 55 member states and ratifying the agreement. The Assembly itself welcomed again the submission of the SACU tariff offer. To date, there has been 36 tariff offers, including 3 customs unions that have technically ratified from other regions. The main issue here again is the rules of origin, wherein 88.3% of the tariff lines have been agreed upon, with only automotive and textile issues being outstanding. On the phase 2 negotiations, again, the main issue that was contentious, to say the least, was the adoption of the various protocols related to the AFCFTA. The first protocol being the protocol on the competition policy, and the second one was the investment protocol. Without the inclusion of Article 19 and 21, those articles have been bracketed. And also the protocol on intellectual property rights, which was again adopted with the caveat to develop an integrated work program or an annex, which will deal with the proposal to establish a single continental intellectual property office, which will be located within the AFCFTA, the Secretariat. The Assembly urged all member states to keep the momentum towards the full implementation of the AFCFTA, as it is deemed to be the only viable instrument that will place Africa on a path towards sustainable economic development and growth. Next slide, please. As the Portfolio Committee may know, our president is the champion of COVID-19, and in his regular reports, he's got to present a report during the Assembly, also during the mid-year coordination. And the report basically is on the status of what the continent has done and is undertaken during the interceding period. The president presented the report on the continent's response to COVID, and the Assembly called upon member states to support the financial stability of the Africa Center for Disease Control as an important institution to deal with pandemics such as Ebola, malaria, and other diseases and viruses that continue to afflict the continent. The Assembly was also urged to increase efforts and political will to improve vaccination rates in pursuit of the target of 70% vaccination on the continent. The operationalization of the Africa Center for Disease Control as an autonomous body is critical to achieve the above-mentioned undertaking. Hence, the Assembly called for the prioritization of the Africa Center for Disease Control. A welcome and positive development was the appointment of Dr. Jean Keseya from the DRC, who is now the new DG, replacing the previous DG of the Africa Center for Disease Control. President Ramaphosa, with other heads of states, expressed a message of support towards the new leadership of the program, that was launched by the Africa Center for Disease Control on the 18th of February, 2023. Closely related to the above issue was the issue of gender-based violence and the overall issue of women empowerment. And the president, in his capacity, President Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo from Ghana, who is a champion for women empowerment, again invited President Ramaphosa to participate in an event on gender-based violence to lend support to the issue, which is also a priority for South Africa. Next slide, please. The Assembly was seized again with the issue of the evaluation of Agenda 2063. And this is a legacy issue for South Africa, especially a project that was led by our former chairperson of the African Union Commission, and is critical to achieving the Africa we want. The Assembly welcomed the evaluation report of the first 10-year implementation and the development of Agenda 2063. And again, the development of the program for the second 10-year implementation was one of the issues that we as South Africa are now going to focus on. The findings from the first 10-year implementation revealed that the continent has made notable progress and performance on some of the targets, such as the AfCFTA and the single African air transport market. However, there are still several projects that have registered limited progress, such as silencing of the guns and the establishment of the financial institutions of the AU. Member states were urged to consolidate their achievements and build upon the next second 10-year implementation program, which is 2024 to 2034. Next slide, please. And this slide on G20 membership and also other aspects is the first bullet speaks to the desire by President Macky Sall to advance the participation and the membership of the African Union to join the G20. President Macky Sall, as part of his legacy, we believe that he has been ambitiously involved in these discussions to ensure that Africa has got access, to a whole range of advocacy programs within the G20. There was support for this proposal, and the advocacy for G20 is going to continue, and with all the other G20 countries. President Macky Sall embarked on this initiative during his chairship in 2022, and already he reported that 10 of the G20 members, including South Africa, have supported this initiative for the AU to join the G20. On the issue of the reform of the UN Security Council, the Assembly reiterated the need to reform the United Nations Security Council to conform to the present geopolitical realities and also to address the continent's non-representation in the permanent category, and again, the gross underrepresentation in the non-permanent category of the UN Security Council. The Assembly reaffirmed its firm commitment to the common African position, which is a Zulu consensus, and also the Celtic Declaration as the only viable option for Africa's full representation at the United Nations Security Council. South Africa, as one of the founding members of NEPAD, participated in the Heads of State and Government Committee, wherein progress in the implementation of NEPAD priorities was discussed. Egypt has been nominated as a new chair of the outer NEPAD for the next 2 years. Next slide, please. The issue of the Israeli observer status has been discussed briefly by the Deputy Minister. So on this slide, we'll go to the next one. I will not go over it again. Next slide, please. Can we go to slide 11? Okay. In conclusion, Chair, our participation in the AU meetings is extremely crucial, especially informed by the fact that South Africa is one of the top 5 countries, which are called the tier 1 countries. And as such, our participation in the AU, similar to the UN, enables us to turn around and influence the policy framework within the AU. One of the things that may not necessarily be obvious in these meetings is that lack of participation basically means we are going to be driven by small countries who contribute very little in terms of finances. And as such, we will end up paying or contributing towards issues that we as one of the highest payers have not been party to. So our participation becomes strategic at different levels, and we are now in the process of ensuring that we optimize on our participation in these meetings, and that has been an issue that we've increasingly changed focus on. We are currently also serving a 2-year term on the AU, on the Peace and Security Council, and our term is going to end in February 2024. We will continue advocating for peace and stability on the continent and also advancing the roadmap on silencing of the guns by 2030. South Africa welcomes the theme on the AFCFTA and is fully committed to its success. Once fully operational, the AFCFTA will boost economic growth across the continent and also help us tackle our challenges of high unemployment, poverty, and inequality. The AFCFTA will provide us with an opportunity to access markets beyond those that are within the proximity of the region, but to expand to the West and the North Africa. The 2023 is exactly 60 years since the establishment of the OAU, and we are recommending that we use this year to advance the principles of the founding fathers of the OAU, and we anchored in the spirit of Pan-Africanism, unity, and solidarity. So we are going to be embarking on that exercise. Well, Chair, thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to present. We certainly appreciate the support from the Portfolio Committee, and any advice that would be welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. DM, is there any amplification you want to make?
From my side, no, not at this moment, Slalo.
Thank you very much. And Dr. Botes, honorable members, there's the presentation. Do we have questions, queries, comments? Let me look at the hands here. Outstanding, proceed, ma'am.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for the presentation that we just received. However, I have a few questions. We have so many declarations that were signed by the African Union, with the ones like Ezulwini Consensus, which was to reform the Security Council, and the presentation covers that. However, such consensus were adopted in 2005, and if you have to count the number of years that have passed since then, it seems like there is a lack of political will to actually enforce these consensus on the Security Council. Because if you look at the number of states that Africa represents at the Security Council, I don't see why we are unable to make our voice heard in such bodies. And then secondly, Chair, for the African Continental Free Trade Agreement to actually reach its maximum capacity, you need the free movement of people. And the last time I asked this question regarding the protocol on the free movement of people, I was told that I think it was with Home Affairs. But as SADC, how far have we gone in ratifying the protocol for free movement of people? And then, Chairperson, there's this one called the Single African Air Transport Market, which when this one was adopted, and it was found out that the bilateral air service agreements between regions was basically the problem. And in order to circumvent that, we went further by signing and adopting the YD. But this is also not being implemented. And if you check, the Single African Air Transport Market is only ratified by 35 states out of the 55. What is the holdback? Why is the African Union member states not taking these decisions that we make? We are the ones in Africa that sign up such treaties and develop such treaties, but we also fail to implement them, or we either implement them at a very slow pace. That hampers then the Agenda 2063. Will we be able to achieve all those objectives that are set out in the Agenda 2063? Secondly, we also have Agenda 2030. Have we done an analysis on how far are we with the Agenda 2030 objectives, and will we be able to meet them? And then we hear that South Africa is holding the chairmanship or presidency of the Peace and Security. What would qualify as a peace and security threat in the African continent? And issues like Eswatini, why have they not been dealt with, where we choose to isolate Eswatini like they did with the apartheid government of South Africa in order to bring peace for the people of Eswatini? How do we manage to run a peace and security portfolio in the African continent and look after the DRC and Rwanda if we are failing to look after SADC on its own? And has there been any early warning that the president has found under the peace and security portfolio that is a threat to the African continent in order to prevent issues like what happened in Mozambique? And then, Chair, with regards to also the African continental free trade, I just want to check how far is the African continent in the integration of Africa's infrastructure, and how is the AU dealing with the continuous decline in energy supply in the continent? Recently, Chair, we found out that Africa is the least developed in the internet infrastructure, with also, it was confirmed when we went to Durko, where we were told that internet is becoming a problem in most of our embassies. And I did a little bit of research and I found out that the African continent is sitting at 43% of 73% access to internet. And the internet economy of the African continent can be able to give us 180 billion US dollars contribution to the Africa's GDP. So how is the AU dealing with such issues? Because failure to deal with the movement of people, failure to deal with energy supply, failure to deal with integration of the African infrastructure, it is going to hamper the objective that we have for the African continental free trade. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Austembi. Dadembanza.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. And my apologies for joining a little bit late because of load shedding challenges. Chair, let me just welcome the presentation. It's a positive developments to the right direction. Of course, some of the issues Honorable Msani has covered, particularly I also wanted to check this one of the movement of people, because it's very much important. When you go to Europe, I was with another couple in an aeroplane a couple of weeks ago. They were telling me they were coming from Netherlands, how easy it is to move within their region, France and I think Spain and other countries without having to produce visas. And it makes life very easy politically, economically, and socially. So I think we need to look at that as she is asking, how far are those protocols been signed, so that we then have a situation, because it's very much important if we are going to promote the intra-trade in Africa. Chair, the other one that I want to check, and also we welcome the movement in terms of those countries who were not willing to ratify the African Continental Trade Agreement, that at least now the three countries have also signed, so we're left with one. And I think that is a positive development. But Chair, I just want to check also on the peace and stability, the program in terms of the silencing of the guns, as the presenter was saying, that there seems to be a slow movement in that direction. What is happening, and also issues of governance in Africa. Coming closer to home, I would want to get an update as to how is Lesotho issue has been dealt with, and how is progress in terms of that country, you know, making sure that it doesn't have these instabilities that we have always witnessed, where they form coalitions and then they don't last, those coalitions, and then there's instability politically, even intra-political instability, where you find maybe the ruling party will have its own challenges, and then they topple their leader who's leading the country and all those things. So I think issues of governance also should be taken into account as well. On the issue of African peer review mechanism, can we also get an update as to how that program is progressing? Because I thought it was a very good tool that the African continent is using in order for the different countries to be able to assess one another. And I remember here in South Africa, there have been some conferences that has taken place, and there are programs that were put in place. But after that, it just kept quiet, because as I was alluding to the issue of governance, that was a tool, and is a necessary tool for the continent to be able to be able to review and monitor and evaluate each other as peers, so that we don't have this kind of situations of having Africa not being stable when it comes to issue of governance. Chairperson, lastly, my point would be to say it will be very much helpful also to get these updates as and when they take place, and even if there is no summit that is taking place, but just to keep the committee, you know, abreast, because things are moving very fast in this nowadays, and we need to be, you know, ahead, or to be in par with what it's happening. But I think the presentation, Chair, is giving us hope that at least leaders are meeting, and they have a plan, they are taking decisions, and we're looking forward to see how, because the most important thing, Chair, we always emphasize even here in our country, is the implementation of the decisions or resolutions or protocols or treaties that have been, and everyone also honoring those, and making sure that they meet the target that they have set themselves to achieve. I think that is very much important. So the monitoring and evaluation and the implementation, I think it should be the one that we should use maybe as our dashboard. And when, as and when the department is ready, they can just package those and say, there's a movement here, there's a challenge, it's regressing, so that we'll be able to monitor progress. Thanks very much, Chairperson.
Thanks, Honorable Mbanza. Thank you very much, Honorable Msani. DM and the team, those are the only two speakers.
DM, can I ask the DM to give me an indication, please?
Yes, you can decide who speaks first.
Well, I suppose I don't hear the DM taking the floor.
Proceed, Baba.
Yes. Well, thank you very much. Maybe let me just start with the last intervention from the Honorable Msani. I just wanted to just flag a few things with respect, especially the issues related to the declaration and the declarations of the AU. I think one of the critical issues here, maybe that is very central, is around the fact that the United Nations Security Council, no matter how much we are able to express ourselves politically, is hampered by the fact that its destiny, its shape, and its mandate and its expressions, they center around the P5, which is the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council. Without the agreement or endorsement of any issue from the P5, there's very little that we can say. I mean, we can express continuously our desire for the Security Council to be reformed, but insofar as we are able to influence that discussion, the continuous expression that we continue to make indicates that we are keen to have this issue on the agenda. If we keep quiet about it, then that will be indicative of the lack of interest or perhaps the lack of pursuing the subject matter. So that is the context mainly around these expressions that are continuously being made. The one thing I can say here, Honorable Musani, is that we've now seen one of the P5 members expressing support for the reform of the Security Council. For whatever reason, that expression is quite symbolic because it means there is beginning to be a fragmentation of the resistance that we initially saw, wherein this subject matter was never on the table. There are some who are still resisting, but I think what is useful is for us to express ourselves at least continuously. The issue of the AFCFTA, the free movement of people and the lack of ratification, one of the things that we continue to encourage again in South Africa is basically to make the African Free Continental Trade Area instrument a vehicle to unblock a whole lot of things. The issues pertaining to the challenges of border control and the lack of infrastructure is generally the issue that is challenging with respect to some of these aspects. And I think here, our colleagues from Home Affairs, we are intending to have an interdepartmental meeting with them and also other departments, including transport, so that we now start to understand the comprehensive nature of this program, of these problems, insofar as they impact on the rest of the continent. I will make, for instance, an example, which this one is an experience of, in the context of one specific country, just the aeroplane landing I think they've got this computer system that directs aeroplanes to land through a computerized system. There's literally none of that existent in some of the countries that we've been traveling to and attending meetings. As a consequence, the landing of aeroplanes, also cargo planes, becomes a challenge in that respect. So the issues of safety becomes central, and in terms of aviation standards, at least the little that I know, there are certain standards that need to be adhered to, and you need to also be a member of a global entity which ratifies that your plane can only travel if it has got so many features, and as far as I know, and which is something that I will need to clarify also with the Department of Transport to see how best we can assist. Most of the African countries are not part of that system, and it's about a handful of countries in the African continent that are part of that system. And as such, this issue becomes even more complex and technical beyond only the issue of the air. One does get a sense that the implementation of Agenda 2063 and there's various challenges, as the report on the first 10-year implementation has indicated. Those challenges are challenges that we now within DECO, we want to sit down and unpack them so that they inform our second 10-year implementation in the continent, because that assessment that was done was basically an assessment that informed in a whole lot of things that have hindered the ratification. But the most important thing is that out of the countries that have ratified, we can comfortably say 90% of them, of those countries, at least it's an indication of political will. As to how we implement them, I think that is what we have to extrapolate. We are busy now starting to look very closely as to how far each country is and how far can we as South Africa also optimize on the opportunities with respect to trading with some of the countries within the continent, as we indicated earlier. We also spoke to the issue of sanctions and also early warning system. I just wanted to comprehensively respond to the issue of peace and security. The agenda, our president, when he was presenting the report, it was not being presented in our national capacity. It was presented as the chair of the month for the African Union Peace and Security Council. On the agenda of the AU-PSC, there are countries that are already in conflict, and there are also countries that have been suspended. And so the focus was only on those countries that are already on the agenda of the AU-PSC. The countries that have been quoted here insofar as they are posing challenges and the situations within our immediate region, those are situations that are addressed in the context of SADC. The SADC Troika, as far as I know, is seized with those issues, but the AU itself does not have any of these countries listed on its agenda or incorporated there. And so as such, we were only looking at those countries that are specifically on the agenda of the AU-PSC, and DRC is one of those as an agenda item. The one thing that I think is also valuable to note is the whole issue of access to the internet. That is a challenge throughout the continent. There's varying elements of infrastructure, and there needs to be massive investment in internet technology, especially when it comes to the setting up of towers, and also just the basic issues which here in South Africa have long been there. In some of the countries, literally, issues of access to the internet becomes a luxury, and therefore, coupled together with the road infrastructure with several aspects. So these are investments that a private investor, if allowed, must be sure that it's related to what is it that they can recoup from such an investment. And South Africa, in its own assessment, this is probably one of the issues that will have to follow up through the Presidential Infrastructure Championship Initiative, the PICI. We are working very, very closely now with Alda Nepad to pursue this whole issue of the PICI. We've now started an engagement. In fact, during the assembly, a little before the assembly, we started to engage with the presidency to set up a much more structured engagement with Alda Nepad. And it's a project that we are now going to start to focus on and look at how do we make Alda Nepad invest more of its resources and also its expertise in these areas that are specifically targeted at improving internet access and also unblocking the projects related to Agenda 2063. So those are aspects. I think the intervention is useful, and we will take this as part of our strategic planning going forward. And again, on the issue of the free movement of people, that we will have to engage closely with from the DICO side, because that is an area that has been quite contentious, especially with investors wanting to show the management of visas. I think we will have to take that up with the Home Affairs again to find out how much can we do to unblock them. The issue of the APRM, again, the APRM, we've also had a useful engagement with the APRM, but mainly the Department of Public Service and Administration is the one department that is the lead on the APRM. But is from the DICO perspective, this is one of the areas that we are able to tap into so far as how do we define democracies in the context of the African continent. And that definition and adhering to the tools such as those introduced by the APRM makes it easier for us to understand that is one of the best measures that we can utilize, and we do not want to define our own interpretation and according to the criteria that which is the African continent. So the engagement is something that we want to do. Nigeria has just gone through Ghana. I'm wrapping up.
We don't hear a thing. The line, the network is fluctuating of acting.
So just to say that in a nutshell, the regular updates will be provided.
Chair, we are missing critical responses because I think the presenter is having internet issues, or maybe is hit by load shedding, which is standard now in South Africa.
Yeah, it's a serious problem. But there's also load shedding where I am. It looks like we have lost him completely now.
At the roundabout, turn left.
What do we do?
Chairperson, with your indulgence, Dineo here, could the presenter present, have them
send the responses
in writing, Chairperson, because he has all the questions. Yes, Chairperson. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah. Okay. I think you are right. That's our way out of this matter. Honorable members, do we agree?
Chair.
We've got no choice, Chairperson.
Okay.
Sorry, I lost the.
Sorry, we have just decided that because your network is moved from fluctuation to self-termination, which Honorable Msani correctly characterizes perpetual load shedding. We have agreed that the responses will be sent in writing. So if that could be done within 7 days or so, then it will be okay. So I want to take the opportunity, honorable members, to thank you, DM, your department, for coming to the portfolio committee to account to the portfolio committee. This accountability theme by the legislature of the executive is very, very important, not only today, for the rest of the government. I'm just emphasizing it so that one day when something happens, we can return to this matter. So I want to thank everybody for having made this meeting a success. Thank you very much, honorable members. The meeting is now adjourned.